Teodoro Obiang Jr. is both the Vice President of Equatorial Guinea and one of the biggest playboys on the continent of Africa. Only Obiang funds his lavish lifestyle on his country's dollar, and his lifestyle is indeed lavish. Plastered on Obiang's Instagram are numerous candid photos showing Obiang shaking hands with a diplomat, ambassador, or president. But as dapper as he is in suits, you'll come to realize pictures of him in vacation clothes are way more common than the suited counterparts as you make your way down his page. This is because Obiang Jr. spends much of his time traveling around the world, meeting politicians and going on pleasure trips. He drinks mimosas, wears fancy leather boots, rents expensive boats, and flies in private jets. How does Obiang Jr. access the money that pays for all these items? And why does Obiang Jr. act like he's entitled to it? While most politicians in free countries try to hide their wealth from potential voters who they presume would dislike them for recklessly spending their tax money, there's no doubt Obiang Jr. unabashedly flaunts his wealth. However, Obiang Jr. has no voters or political opponents. He also doesn't have to worry too much about what anyone else thinks in his country. That's because Obiang Jr.'s father, Teodoro Obiang Sr., is the president of Equatorial Guinea and has been since 1979. In other words, you could easily substitute Obiang Sr.'s title of president with a more accurate title of dictator. Unfortunately, the same substitution applied to Obiang Jr. when his father appointed Jr. to be the vice president in 2016. And he's caused a myriad of troubles ever since. The New York Times did a comprehensive piece on Obiang Jr. in 2004. In the article, the Times described Obiang Jr. as a rap music entrepreneur who enjoys a luxurious living. They go on to describe Obiang Jr.'s lavish trips to West LA and Rio de Janeiro, where he rented the super yacht Tatouche for $524,000 during Christmas simply to entertain his rapper friend Eve. International news also criticized Obiang Jr. for spending over $600,000 of his country's money on champagne and property renovations for his home in South Africa. But ignoring the criticisms, he continued to splurge money by buying a 2004 Bentley Arnage and a 2005 Bentley Continental R. Obiang Jr. even bought a 2005 Lamborghini Murcielago as the icing on the cake. The three cars totaled roughly $685,000. But in South African rand, the currency which Obiang Jr. used to sustain his lavish lifestyle, that's a whopping 10 million rands. Aside from funding his extravagant items with his country's dollar, he also frequently uses the US currency, such as purchasing his house in Malibu, which at the time was worth $31 million. Obiang Jr.'s acquisition of the world-class property was the final push needed to bring him to the attention of American investigators. The same ordeal happened in France as well, when Obiang owned a $110 million 5,000 square foot home in a wealthy district of Paris. Both investigations ended with investigators uncovering damning evidence against Obiang Jr., proving he committed an array of financial crimes in France and the United States. But to make things more bizarre, Michael Jackson's memorabilia was somehow involved. In 2011, the United States government accused Obiang Jr. of embezzling $315 million by levying taxes on timber companies in the US. The Department of Justice argued that Obiang Jr. charged a 28-cent tax on every log exported from Equatorial Guinea. The tax funds were supposed to go to the state. Instead, they fell into Obiang Jr.'s pocket. At the time, Obiang Jr. being the forestry minister meant he had to show evidence of his salary. The evidence indicated that he only earned a $100,000 salary. But the Department of Justice argued there was no viable way he purchased all the items he did on only $100,000 a year, especially the Michael Jackson memorabilia collection. Included in the collection were the white crystal gloves Jackson wore on his hand during his bad tour from 1987 to 1988. Obiang Jr. paid $275,000 at an auction just for the gloves. The gloves themselves already exceeded $100,000, which is more than what he supposedly earned for an entire year. In 2011, on suspicion of embezzlement, the Department of Justice seized his Ferrari and Malibu mansion, among many other things. Obiang Jr. managed to regain some of his possessions in a settlement with the United States, but only on the condition that he pledges $20 million worth of his assets to an Equatorial Guinean charity, while another $10 million would go towards repairing his country's infrastructure. Obiang Jr. agreed to the United States conditions. However, by 2012, there was still no evidence proving the money was ever given to charity or an infrastructure fund. A few months after the American settlement, the French government raided Obiang Jr.'s Paris mansion. They found a couple of expensive luxury items in the house that were even more mind-boggling than the nine-figured mansion itself. The French government accused Obiang Jr. of laundering money among other corruption charges, but since Obiang Jr. wasn't in France, they couldn't legally arrest him. So after failing to arrest him through Interpol, an international police organization, the French law enforcement finally tried him in absentia in 2017. They found Obiang Jr. guilty and seized all of his French possessions, including his $110 million Parisian mansion, and fined him 13 million euros. The sentence was announced a little over a year after Obiang Sr. appointed Jr. as vice president, and 4 years after France and the United States accused Obiang Jr. of corruption. So how could Obiang Sr., knowing of Jr.'s crimes, appoint someone like his son to the most powerful political position in Equatorial Guinea? Despite Obiang Jr. having no qualifications and showing reckless character, he's considered the unofficial heir to Equatorial Guinea. This is because Obiang Sr. appointed his son as vice president, who did so purely for political reasons, to stay in power. Obiang Sr. values obedience, and that's something Obiang Jr. does exceedingly well. He does exactly what the president commands him to do. This quality far outweighs any controversy Obiang Jr. has cost the regime. Obiang Sr.'s grandson, Constantino, perfectly encapsulates Sr.'s power-obsessed priority. Constantino Obiang was fired from his position as Director General of his grandfather's state-owned telecommunications company. Why? Because Constantino was accused by his grandfather of participating in a coup to overthrow the Obiang regime. The move may seem harsh, cold, and detached. However, Obiang Sr. understands more than anyone else how easy it is to lose power. Most dictators only rule for a few years, but as of this video's production, Obiang Sr. is the second longest reigning non-royal ruler in the world, though his relatively stable rule came at a cost. Obiang Sr.'s ascension to the Equatorial Guinea presidency was a bloody affair involving generations of the Nguema family members. Nguema is Obiang Sr.'s surname. When Equatorial Guinea fought for its independence in 1968, the Nguema family was at the forefront of the fight, but one Nguema stood out from the rest, Francisco Macias. Born in 1924 in Spanish Guinea, Francisco was the son of a witch doctor who supposedly murdered his uncle. This caused him to have a violent childhood. In the early 60s, Francisco left his father and began a career in the Spanish colonial government. He worked his way up to the position of court interpreter, where Francisco accepted bribes to either incriminate or absolve defendants. The corrupt court official climbed his way up the bureaucratic ladder until he obtained eligibility to run for president. However, around the start of the 1968 Spanish Guinea election, Francisco started experiencing mental problems. He exhibited erratic behavior that resembled symptoms of schizophrenia, such as erratic speech patterns and, later on in his political career, paranoia. At one point, he even had to stay in a mental facility. Despite all that, the Spanish Guineans, assuming his erratic ramblings came from a place of passion, voted him into office anyway. In 1968, Francisco became the first president of the newly founded nation, Equatorial Guinea. The early years of his presidency were marked by his constant effort to hide his mental instability, which worsened year after year. In 1973, Francisco discarded the Equatorial Guinean constitution and replaced it with a new document that gave him absolute power over the nation and its people. Allegedly, 99% of Equatorial Guineans voted in favor of the new document. Whether the people actually voted for it or not, Francisco's dictatorial reign was brutal. Experts estimate the number of people murdered and executed was anywhere between 50,000 to 400,000. For comparison, Equatorial Guinea's population in 2021 was only 1.4 million. In 1979, a few international organizations like the UN publicly condemned Francisco for the atrocities he committed. Even some of his family members stepped up against him. But it was at the same year during the summer when Francisco forcefully rounded up several Nguema family members and executed them with a firing squad. The government officials surrounding Francisco started to think their fearless leader was becoming unhinged. His paranoia was growing too great. One of the executed family members happened to be his nephew, brother of Teodoro Obiang Sr. Obiang Sr. watched as his uncle Francisco slaughtered his brother on baseless claims of betrayal. He could see his uncle, like so many others, unraveling and not fit for presidency. So Obiang Sr., at just 37, led a coup against his uncle, and in the process he stole the loyalty of his uncle's cabinet. Francisco tried to flee the country after his government turned on him. While escaping, an old lady came across Francisco on her property, quote, thin as a rail eating sugar canes out in the jungle. She contacted the police force who brought Francisco to his nephew in chains. Upon receiving Francisco, Obiang Sr. simply ordered a firing squad for his uncle. Then, in 1979, he seized the presidency and had held the position ever since. In 2003, Obiang Sr. called himself the country's god over a radio broadcast. And, according to his financial records, he just might be the god of Equatorial Guinea. This young nation's economy relies heavily on its plentiful oil reserves, almost all of which are state-owned by Obiang Sr. Forbes in 2010 estimated that his personal fortune is at least $700 million. We can only imagine that figure is probably much higher. Since most of that fortune is dictated by the vast oil reserves, Obiang Sr.'s grip on Equatorial Guinea is very strong. If Obiang Sr. can manage a smooth succession of power from him to Obiang Jr., Equatorial Guinea will remain under their regime for decades to come. Click to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comment section who you think is the most corrupt politician that's in power today.